Hello, you are listening to On the Topic, and this week we're diving into the vault for something shaken and not stirred. I'm Dan.
Yeah, and I've got my Walther PPK and my Aston Martin. I'm Alex. And this week, Dan, we're opening up that vault. We're diving in. We're going back to 2018, I think.
This was like our 5th episode, Alex.
It was. Yeah, it was. I've listened back actually. It's quite an interesting one because when we did the original podcast, which was the weekly roundup days, we were talking about what's in pop culture and some films. So we'll talk about. And you're hearing the second listener. We're talking about the upcoming Venom film, the first one, with Tom Hardy, and some other bits and pieces. So it's quite interesting to go back and hear about our thoughts and hopes and dreams, and obviously what's happened since in the 3 films and the car crash that is the Sonyverse. But all things aside, no, this week we are going to be talking about who's going to be taking up the mantle of James Bond 007, Dan.
Not a lot's changed from what you were saying.
No, so this is before they announced No Time to Die. So we were theorising. We knew that Daniel Craig had signed on to it, but he said it was definitively his last film. And the bookies were talking about who was up in the running for replacing him. And we were talking about how there were several actors, some obvious ones and some not obvious ones, and also a gender swap, I think you were bringing to the conversation as well.
Yes, I think we mentioned Gillian Anderson. But of course, after No Time to Die, we had Lashana Lynch suggested as a possible female Bond.
Of course, she does feature, and she is 007 in No Time to Die. She's his replacement, and then he comes back, and there's 2 007s, which is a bit weird. So at least we got something right, or at least the conversation kind of nailed something. We got some interesting listener feedback as well, so I won't spoil it. It's in the episode. But I just wanted to perhaps, because the debate is still relevant, Dan, as you mentioned. I want to kind of bring it back into 2025. And it's probably going to age badly because we're probably going to be talking about this again in maybe another 8 years.
Yeah.
But as of today, we have got, well, before it was Aaron Taylor-Johnson, we've got a couple of other names that have since cropped up. Now, I didn't know who this guy was, but James Norton, who we looked up, apparently is now the outright favourite to play the famous British spy, which is a flip on its head because we had a number of British actors who were in the lead. The guy from The Bodyguard,
yes, and
Game of Thrones. We had Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Henry Cavill, but that was all we had there. Richard Madden. That's all we had there in the running. But no, this new guy, James Norton's coming to the scene. And apparently he's showing versatility. I haven't seen anything, to be honest. But for those who watch BBC, apparently he's in the Happy Valley. Now, apparently he's also proved himself in the 22 spy film Rogue Agent, playing Robert Hendy Freegard, a convicted fraudster, who tricked and convinced several people that he was an MI5 agent. So he's kind of already done it, but as a different spin on things. But other actors who are, and this is on gambling.com, by the way, guys, gambling's not good, so don't do it.
Or if you do, then
know your limits.
Know your limits, exactly.
Yeah. Gambling aware. But the bookies are saying that James Norton's 3-1. And Betfred are giving those odds. Actually, I'm not going to tell you who's going to be giving those odds because I'm just playing into it. But James Norton is 3-1. Aaron Taylor-Johnson, who I'm a big fan of, actually. I quite like him.
Yeah, I like him.
Could he be a Bond? I don't know, but he's 7-2. You've got Harris Dickinson 4-1. Theo James at 4-1. H. Cavs at 6-1. Jack Lowden joint 6-1. Callum Turner 8-1. Joss O'Connor 8-1. Paul Mescal. He was in the recent Gladiator 2, I think.
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar, but
no, 16-1. You got Lucien Laviscount at 20-1. Regine Page at 20-1. Richard Madden now is at the bottom of the table.
No way.
25-1. You got Soap Dirisu at 28-1, and Adams and Idris at 33-1. So we've got a couple of mainstays there, but actually the table has really changed in those last 7 years or 8 years since this episode. So yeah, whilst we are talking about some of the actors, actually Barbara Broccoli hasn't confirmed one way or another. It's still open. in reality, they've probably nailed it by now.
Mm.
I mean, what, it's been 2 years since No Time to Die, was it?
It was 2021 it came out, so
Crikey,
we're just
3 years,
past
4 years.
3 years.
So it's been a long time, actually, in the movie world. And MGM, they've been in financial disarray for a while now. This is the only franchise they can make money on.
Didn't MGM get bought out by someone?
I think it was Amazon.
Yes, you're right, because we talked about it in Captain America Brave New World review 2 episodes ago. That someone that I know who had worked for Disney is now working for Amazon, and things are really starting to kick off now with Bond.
There you go. So they're doing stuff. We don't know anything. But it's an interesting episode. And a lot of it's still relevant in terms of debate and what they're going to be doing and why they're going to be doing it. And actually, what did Craig bring to it, and do we need something different? So, I mean, for me, I quite enjoyed it. It's quite a short episode. It's 30 minutes. So, again, piddling around the house or doing a bit of work in the background or going for, a lunchtime walk, whatever it is. It's quite a nice early episode, and it sounds pretty crisp.
Does it?
It does.
It's an episode of its time, though, no doubt. We were still amateur podcasters back then.
Some might say we still are.
Wow, I don't know about you,
We're
Alex,
older.
but me,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
We're older and
Profesh.
wiser, though.
Profesh. But with that in mind, sit back, relax, listeners. Enjoy a trip in time as we go back to 2018 with our episode. The name is... Who?
Hello, Radsters, and welcome to another episode of the Weekly Roundup with Alex and Dan. I am Dan.
And I am Alex. And this week we are going to be talking about the next iteration of the most popular British spy done by Ian Fleming. It's, of course, James Bond.
I'm excited for this one. I'm always excited for these podcasts anyway, but James Bond, I was actually introduced to by my nan. I think the first film I ever watched was Diamonds Are Forever.
Oh, right, yeah.
So a bit of an oldie, so it was my introduction, but I can still remember briefly in the late 90s playing GoldenEye on the N64.
The world's best game to date.
Best shoot 'em up.
For sure. But before, I guess, we start going down that old nostalgia route and talking perhaps about, Daniel Craig and who's next.
Yep.
Bit of news.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's kick that off.
So, quite a lot's happened actually in the last week. I've got a couple of bits and pieces here. First of all, let's go to a bit of Tom Hardy and Venom. Now, we've talked about Venom, I guess, in a couple of previous podcasts about what we're looking forward to in 2019. I think it was episode 3.
Episode 3, when we talked about what we want to see for the rest of the half of the year.
Yep.
I think Venom was mainly your choice, but I think it was something I wanted to see as well.
Yeah, well, there's a latest. It's not a trailer. They've already done one trailer. This is a fight scene which shows Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock then transforming into the symbiote, and he kicks ass. It's only about 30 seconds long, but it just goes to show I guess, how brutal and gritty it really is. And it kicks off with all of these armed men with machine guns pointing at him, and they're prepared to engage him.
He's got all these little red dots on his chest, and he's like, "You don't want to do this."
And to be fair, he warns them, and then someone fires a gun, and then he just starts jumping into the mix, catching bullets and grenades left, right and centre, throwing people around like they're rag dolls. And I think it's the first proper time you really see the kind of tone of the film. I mean, you get the idea from the trailer, but this 30-second clip just shows just how far that, it's Sony, isn't it, with this, just how far they're going with this character who is an anti-hero. I mean, I listened to an interview by Tom Hardy earlier in the week, and he was saying how it's interesting that the two kind of characters are the antithesis of each other, and how you've got the innocence of Eddie Brock, but then the cavalier kind of anti-hero of Venom. You put them two together and it just shows the fragility and how they both require one another because they're in this situation. I think it's going to be a fantastic film, but if you haven't seen the fight scene, as I say, it's not long. It's 36 seconds long, so to speak, but it's shaping up to be really quite the film.
There's this fantastic bit where the symbiote sort of shoots out on like 5 or 6 different things. It pulls these weapons away, and then Venom just grabs this guy and he swings him around, battering everyone else, and then he just throws him through like 3 or 4 panes of glass. It's so good.
As I say, it's not a full-blown trailer. It's
more of a snippet. I think it's like a sneak peek, as you say. It still tries to show us what this film's really going to be about.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to it. Wasn't too sure at first. It is one of my picks of 2019. I think it's shaping up to be quite the film.
I've got the feeling they've probably captured Venom as well as Marvel portray him in the comics as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, I love Venom. I think he's one of my favourite anti-heroes / villains.
Yeah.
It'll be cool to see where they go with this film.
Agreed. I'll put a link in all of these actually into the description below. Next up, now we talked about this I think a couple of episodes ago. This is the latest, probably in realistic terms, the last outing from the first class X-Men kind of current iteration of those characters. This is Dark Phoenix. Now, the trailer has fully now dropped, but where a couple of weeks ago...
I slammed it. I said it's probably not going to see the light of day, but actually, as far as I can remember, I read last night that they've actually pushed the film back again, so I think it's coming sort of mid next year now.
Yeah, I mean, it's still been troubled by production, and I think it has faltered because of the franchise, the Fox merger. Perhaps Kevin Feige, head of Marvel Cinematic Universe, has come on board. So you know what? This is good. It could be better, and perhaps that's what the delay's for in terms of perhaps some reshoots or some direction. But as I say, the trailer's dropped. It's a good 2 minutes long. First impressions, Dan. I mean, you saw this.
Do you know what? I'm actually convinced this could be a good film. There is potential. But then we've had that with previous X-Men films. And actually, when we were talking about this before we started recording, that some of the films just sort of flopped. Like Apocalypse, we had this grand villain in the comics.
Yeah.
Where
the big bad, but in when it comes to the film, just doesn't transition over. And that really missed the mark for me. It was a great letdown. And even Days of Future Past, which had potential with Jackman, reprising his role as Wolverine, he was really the only saving grace of that film.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
You guys might disagree.
And please, share us your thoughts or comments in descriptions below on social media. But this one, I mean, I said to Dan, this is either a masterclass in how to put together a trailer and the film's still going to be terrible, or it's going to be that good. And the only reason why I say that is there are some elements of comedy which you can see in there, but it's primarily quite dark.
It's quite dark. There's a bit where you've got a young Jean Grey in a car, and her parents are in the front driving, and then this car just suddenly sort of hits a lorry and then it flips.
Yeah. And
I think they're going to sort of give you a bit more of an idea of her powers in this film, sort of going from the past to now. And from the looks of it, she's influenced by the Brotherhood of Mutants, which is of course led by Magneto, and it then shows how Professor X, Charles Xavier, has been protecting her, and perhaps he's not quite the perfect professor that we've seen perhaps in the previous films, and he's partly to blame, as I guess we saw in X-Men 3, which was back in 2006. 2006, it's been that long.
Which, I think it's widely recognised as a poor film. I'd like to think they handle the character and, the fall from grace more adequately in this version. But have a look at the trailer, give us your thoughts and opinions. I think it could be shaping up, contrary to what we said before, we're not adverse to admitting when we're wrong. I might have changed my opinion on this. I think it could turn out to be a great film.
And it could be a good swan song for Fox.
Agreed, which I think ends up going to be as a departure for that timeline and that iteration of the X-Men. But
another trailer which we've seen drop is the final trailer for Fantastic Beasts.
Yeah, and the Crimes of Grindelwald. Now, this one again is a lot darker. You see a lot more of the lore of Harry Potter. You're back in some famous locales. You're seeing some characters come to the forefront. I mean, you've got Nagini.
Yes.
which is the giant snake that you see, I guess, intermittently throughout the films, plays a fantastic plot twist towards the end of the final film. So if you haven't read the books, haven't seen the films, I won't go into too much detail about why a gigantic snake, is so important in the Harry Potter world, but features quite clearly in this trailer. Jude Law, you get some more screen time as Dumbledore. I know he's quite divisive as someone who's been cast as this character, but I'm coming around to it. I was in two minds again with this one. We
did talk about this in I think episode 3.
Yeah,
and we were a bit wary of having him as such a big character as.
Yeah, but I think he might actually end up pulling it off. I mean, lots of fight scenes, lots of depth, throwing the wand around, lots of chase scenes and flying glass and smoke and wild animals. But this will be a darker film. It's not about the wonderful magical world of wonderful beasts.
I mean, Eddie Redmayne has been potentially set up to kill, which is an interesting twist on such a nervous character that we knew in the first film.
I think this will be a break from his previous outing. I think this is the grittier times and more recent Potter films. Out this November. Let's see, how it ends up coming up in the next couple of months. But this could shape up to be quite the film.
I'm looking forward to this one.
And the latest trailer, I think, is well worth a watch. So, again, it'll be in the descriptions. Roughly about 2 minutes 20 long. Have a look. But, intriguing stuff. Next up for me, and this is now going to
the MCU.
Marvel Cinematic Universe. We've talked about this a couple of times of recent podcasts. Far From Home. Spider-Man 2.
We've seen a snippet, haven't we? Like, we've seen a grainy picture of a black Spider-Man suit.
We have. So it's currently in production at the minute. They're filming. I think I've seen an Instagram post in Italy, in Venice. So that's another country to scratch off.
Oh,
but one of the set photos is, I guess, Tom Holland or the stunt actor who supports him, hanging off a Ferris wheel. Big fairground circular thing. We've got one of our own on the south coast of Portsmouth.
Clarence Pier.
And he's dressed all in black.
Which would be interesting because obviously we know Sony are running with Venom and the symbiote. Could this be a completely different suit? Because we've seen Spider-Man in the comics in various kinds of suits. Could it be a stealth suit, I wonder, or...
Well, they say it's not going to be the symbiote because obviously Venom's out.
Yeah.
You can't have the two different versions. And anyway, the Marvel Cinematic Universe don't own that character. Sony do. So they think it's a stealth suit. But this can't be... I mean, is it on loan by Tony Stark? Because, of course, he gives the upgraded suit, not as we know it in Infinity War, but a suit of some description, of course, in Homecoming. So is this another functionality, or is this something which Peter, builds himself? He's known to be a gadget man. But either way, interesting in going down that particular route. I mean, he's got to be swinging around in cities that aren't like New York, which don't have the skyscrapers. He needs to avoid being detected. So a stealth suit it may be. But interesting when it landed a couple of days ago. So some inkling into what we might see from the follow-up from Homecoming.
Next up is a new Joker.
Yeah, Joaquin.
Let's run with that.
Phoenix. Apologies if we've not quite described it properly. He's in an excerpt, I guess, from production currently, where he's interacting with the stereotypical white face, red nose kind of Joker character. There's some kind of altercation, which I guess plays in some ways to the origins of the criminal mastermind. However, there's also another part to this, which is the actor who's just stood there in what looks like just a normal, regular, everyday clothing setup, and there's a projector that's flashing in front of his face as he stood still, to the point where he's overlaying a Joker face, to the point where then it finishes with almost like a Jack Nicholson type style Joker, which we knew back in the 90s, which is the white face, the red eyebrows, the red characteristic large mouth, and the red nose, which is painted on. It's not, the makeup smeared, which we
knew as Heath Ledger in
which is
The Dark Knight.
It's still character defining, right? I mean, lots of people still unsure about this casting and bringing the character back quite so soon. But this could be a meaningful way of reimagining for a new actor, and I'm actually quite interested now to see what they're going to do with this character. I mean, obviously they've had Joker done recently for the DCU.
Yeah, we had the chap from 30 Seconds.
Jared Leto.
That's it.
Where, he's seen as a gangster, he's all tattooed. I think it's an interesting take, but he hardly had any screen time in Suicide Squad, which, for all of the filming, all of the hype, he only had something like 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, it wasn't long at all.
Bizarre. And I think he's going to be sticking around for, I think, another film from that era, maybe from the Batman, which would be Ben Affleck's, I guess, final outing as Batman. He's now confirmed he's hanging up his cape, but this looks interesting.
I'm intrigued. I say we've had so many renditions of the Joker over the years, and I think the more recent one for me was in the TV series Gotham.
Yep.
A very young Joker and a bit of a throw to the Heath Ledger crazed Joker, which we all knew and loved in the mid-noughties.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where they're going to go with this one.
So interesting stuff there. But that's all this week's news. Plenty's happened in the last couple of days since Dan and I got together and recorded the last podcast. But yeah, we'll give you plenty of news as and when it happens on future episodes. But as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we're here to talk about MI6's most famous spy is, of course, James Bond.
So Daniel Craig's going into his last film. Now, we weren't sure if he was actually going to be reprising his role again for, I think it's film 25.
I would rather slit my wrists, he said. Now, which is quite the statement when someone said, are you going to be reprising the role? But it transpires, of course, that he has done a U-turn. That's probably because MGM, I think, still own the production rights to this. Well, certainly Barbara Broccoli, who's a producer, probably said, look, Daniel, here's a lot of money, make one more outing. Because he's done 3 or 4?
I think it was about 4.
4 now.
4.
And he did say in that interview, that famous interview now, that he'd prefer not to, in quite a graphic way. And that's because he just finished a gruelling kind of, I think it was 6 or 9 months filming. But since then, of course, said he's going to do at least one more. It's not titled yet, is it?
Not yet, no.
But we watched, just before we get into, I guess, who's going to be perhaps picking up the Aston Martin, so to speak, from Daniel Craig. What are your thoughts on the latest, or all of his films, perhaps, for Craig?
Not a massive fan. I mean, I got introduced into James Bond around the times of Sean Connery and Roger Moore, so I'm very sort of old school. Loved Pierce Brosnan, but Daniel Craig, if my nan was still alive, I don't think she would have liked him, because he's not your typical Bond who was like dark hair, dark eyes, very suave. He was very sort of like blonde, blue eyes, quite gritty.
He certainly, I think, broke the mould when Casino Royale back in 2006 first came out. That's still, though, one of my most favourite Bond films, because it was modern for a start. It didn't rely upon gadgets, where perhaps the Pierce Brosnan one did towards the end, which I think they lost their way in Die Another Day and the likes. And it showed a fragility about the character. James Bond almost is Teflon. Bullets bounce off him. He's bulletproof. But actually, Casino Royale really showed just how he wasn't, and in fact he dies.
He got poisoned, if I remember rightly.
He gets poisoned, and actually He's saved by the lead actress in that film, but he dies, which is unheard of from a James Bond character. So for me, it is one of my favourite films. But Quantum of Solace, I mean, I think I pretty much nearly fell asleep in the cinema.
That was a bit of a tie-in to Casino Royale.
Yeah, follow on.
I was at university when I went to see this with my flatmates, and to be honest, it was very much I got bored. Take
it or leave it, I think. The end fight scene's quite good, which takes place in the desert. It's isolated. There's lots of henchmen. There's a massive explosion. It's his whole world, figuratively and literally, is falling down around his ears. And there's justice served at the very end, where I think the lead character ends up having to drink a carton of motor oil, because it's all about this oil tycoon who has this link into the seedy underworld. But otherwise, I mean, take it or leave it for me. And I think the next defining one was Skyfall. Looks into the background. We mentioned it in Casino Royale. He is a child who's grown up with no parents. He has been hand-selected because he's psychologically perhaps unfit in social circles, but as someone who has no scruples about killing, he's a perfect character. And it's all about his background, about why he's been chosen as someone to work for MI6, and how it ends up coming back in reality to then ultimately see the ending of his mentor, which is M, played by Judi Dench, and that's her swan song. That's her final outing in the lead role.
Interestingly, that had one of my favourite villains. Now I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it was nice to have a villain which was just a crazed villain. He just wanted to destroy everything, whereas previous villains always had like some kind of motive. So for me, it was just that crazy, insane, and they're in that sort of mansion in Scotland.
Yeah, that's his family home.
He's flying in, like blowing stuff up from the helicopter.
Yeah, I mean, the character's called Silver, and it's played by Javier Bardem, who has been wronged by M in the past, and goes on a personal vendetta, an explosive one actually, that goes across all of the world, spanning the globe, and ends up hitting home in London in the final scenes. And I think it's a great film. Probably one of my favourites from the Craig films, culminating, I guess, continuing on with Spectre, which is the latest one back in 2015.
Yeah.
So a while ago now, 3 years, it'd be 4, I guess, before the latest Untitled comes out. I was rather indifferent to this one.
Yeah, I agree.
I just thought, even the car scenes were flat. He's supposed to be excited, supposed to be engaged. I really could have done without spending some hard-earned cash on a couple of hours watching it in the cinema.
Tried to bring back some of the old villains as well. We had like a descendant of Blofeld, if I remember rightly. Yeah.
Well, I think it was a reimagining of Blofeld as the head of Spectre, the underground criminal organisation, and I think it was a culmination of all those previous films. So it was a continuation of the theme, which I think is great. But where they go next is, I guess, anyone's guess. He's not going to do one after this. No. I think it's pretty fair to say. There's lots of speculation about who would take up the mantle. We asked you on social media, listener, about what's your thoughts or feelings on who should play the lead role in after Craig's next film. We've got some comments, haven't we, Dan?
We have. So we've got Phil, who just went on to say kill him off. It's gone on for too long now. I'm not sure about that one. I think there's too much money in that franchise to lose. I'm just going to go through to Simon. So he commented, difficult one this, but I don't particularly like Daniel Craig as Bond, so anything is an improvement.
Oh, wow.
If they hadn't done so much Marvel stuff, I would say Hemsworth or Jackman. Maybe Tom Hardy, who I believe is or was favourite for the role.
Yeah, he's been picked as one of the people that perhaps should do it, because He's proved himself in action films. He's quintessentially British. He's got some charm.
Yeah.
Why not?
And he also went on to say, I did like the idea of Idris Elba until he shot it down. So we could possibly be looking at an interracial James Bond.
Yeah, I think there is. I think that's a double bluff. I think Idris could well end up being the next James Bond, and I'm fully behind it. I think he's a fantastic actor. He hasn't done too much, I think, in the movie world. That might be because he's in talks for this role.
We also had a friend of mine, Kyle. He said Henry Cavill, so who we currently know as Superman.
Yep.
Also just hung up his cape, actually.
He has, as the Man of Steel. He will no longer be Superman, which I think, well, currently. So they are taking a break on that character and looking at Supergirl and other characters in the DCU universe. Could be Cavill.
Also third favourites, according to the English bookies, 6-1. He also admitted that he would love to be the next James Bond.
I'm sure he would.
Who wouldn't? I mean, I'd like to be James Bond.
Won't we all? That's one of the things I wanted to be when I was growing up. I wanted to be a spy.
I mean, one of my recommendations for the role is Tom Hiddleston. Now, again, probably not your typical James Bond, but me and my other half, we watched The Night Manager a couple of years ago, and Hugh Laurie was the villain. It was very, wouldn't say a Bond-style series, but there's a bit towards the end of the finale. He stood there, and everything's exploding in the background. It was so James Bond, I thought, yeah, this could do it. This could be it. But it's a very good series, so by all means check out and tell me that I'm wrong. But he's very suave in it. He did build up a lot of muscle for the role. It could happen. You may
not have seen adverts by Jaguar a couple of years ago where they did a tongue-in-cheek kind of advert for, I think it was their latest sports car, and it was done by Brit Hollywood movie actors, and it was all about how Brits are always seen as the baddies in film, and he's all dressed up in a tux, drives the Jaguar, and you just think, you know what, there might be something in this.
Yeah.
So could be Hiddleston.
An interesting one, Orlando Bloom.
Not for me.
Too bland.
Hasn't done much recently. Got himself in some trouble on a paddleboard, I think, with Katy Perry.
Yeah.
I don't think he'd bring to the character of what he's looking for personally, but stranger things have happened.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting one that has come up is Richard Madden, who you'll all know as Robb Stark from Game of Thrones.
Yes.
He recently did a TV series on the BBC called The Bodyguard.
I've yet to see that. I've recorded it, but I've heard good things.
It's a very good series. Again, check it out. And it's a bit of a strange one for me. Like, I could see him as Bond, because it's, again, very sort of action-packed, very dramatic. Possibly.
Does he bring the gravitas, though, that's required? I mean, every single Bond you've had pretty much has been a household name. I mean, George Lazenby wasn't so much, but he was still well known in the movie or the cinematic world at that time. Could he still bring kind of the attention that perhaps this character needs? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because all the Bonds that we know have been household names, whereas Richard Madden's mainly just known for Game of Thrones and the Disney remake of Cinderella, I think.
I mean, look, he's fantastic in Game of Thrones, and Game of Thrones has a significant amount of talent, but I just wonder whether it's enough to carry the franchise forward after Craig, who he's been typecasted, right? I don't think he's done really anything much since he started this latest run of the character. It's a tough follow-up, even though, again, I acknowledge there are some mishaps. Is that enough to continue the mantle?
I've got to ask a question. Could we see a Jane Bond?
This is the other thing. So, who's been tipped as a potential?
Only one, and it was Gillian Anderson from The X-Files.
Now,
also was in The Fall as well, which again a very good series. She co-starred in that with Jamie Dornan, who is also mentioned as a possible Bond role.
I mean, anything's possible, right? We're in 2018. Equal opportunities. We've got lots of things going on in terms of, equality. Why not?
Could happen.
Looking at a different cultural representation, gender representation of that type of role could happen. And Gillian, I mean, she I didn't realise she's British. She's straight up from the UK. So she ticks that box. She's got class. She is incredibly talented, intelligent. She could carry it off if they decide to go down that route. I just don't know whether Barbara Broccoli, who looks after ultimately the franchise from a producing perspective, would want to go down that route, given that it's always been quite misogynistic as a role in the character. But times change, as do people and their expectations, and I'd love to see a different take on the character for sure.
I mean, interestingly as well, I'm going back a couple of years, so I've just sort of sat here, just did a quick run on Google, because power is knowledge. She actually hinted she would accept the role as the first female Bond, and she actually tweeted out a mock poster. It's not hard to find if you find it. I might even try and put a tweet up of it tonight, and there's a picture of her with that sort of standard, like the gun barrel
tunnel, yeah.
So I'll try and post that when this podcast comes up and see what happens.
And we've got finally a joke suggestion that came through on social media. We may need to explain this for those who don't perhaps come from the South Coast or in the UK, but what did one of our listeners suggest?
Well, we've had a couple of joke ones, or whether he's being serious or not, I don't know, but my brother actually suggested Ronan Curtis because he's a top... I'll leave it there.
A top individual, perhaps.
If you go into Portsmouth Football Club folklore or current folklore, you will find that Ronan Curtis is a top something. So basically, Ronan Curtis is one of our football players, and he plays on the left wing, and he's been in very good form since he joined in the summer. We'll leave it at that one. Also, we had one from Tom who suggested Jeremy Clarkson.
I mean, I've heard he's quite good at a right hook,
driving cars.
But that's only really if he doesn't quite get his steak ordered correctly from a hotel restaurant. Again, quite niche and specific to the UK there. So, I mean, I think it's open, and I think that's why I like it so much. There's plenty of controversy around the role and what actually direction should take moving forwards. Whoever's going to be has got to be strong, has got to pull that kind of gravitas, as I said before, about the character, and I think it's got to reflect the times. I mean,
absolutely.
James Bond, if you see all the way through all 25, 26...
Yep. Up to film 25.
Different iterations, be it the same character but reimagined, a couple of years later, they're all wildly different, either in terms of abilities, the way in which they interact with society of that time, or what they reflect by way of political arena. You had the Russians in the early 80s, all the way going through to North Korea in 2000s to now, which is, I think, it's largely neutral, but looking at criminal underworld, and I think it's got to represent the current political climate. So I think there's lots of scope here. Interesting to get your thoughts and opinions, listener. If you have any other comments, drop us a comment on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or email. We'll read them out in the next podcast. But I think otherwise that's a wrap for this episode.
It is a wrap.
So I've been Alex.
And I've been Dan.
And we'll see you next week.